Forget everything you think you know about Dr. Amelia Winters, the celebrated astronaut who captured the world's imagination with her journey beyond the stars. The world saw her as a pioneer, a beacon of human achievement, devoted to exploration and the advancement of science. But beneath that familiar image lay a side of her that only a select few ever glimpsed, a side obsessed with secrets that stretched far beyond our understanding of the universe. You've been fed the sanitized version of history, the one where heroes stay neatly within the boundaries of their public personas. But what if I told you that Dr. Winters was entangled in something far stranger and far darker than any of us could have imagined? I was there, I saw it, and before they silence me, you need to know the truth. My name is Michael Reeves, and for over a decade, I served as Dr. Winters' closest confidant and mission specialist. But I was more than just a colleague. I was tasked with a secret mission of my own, to keep track of her contacts, to monitor her movements, and most importantly, to document her growing fascination with something humanity has always feared yet been drawn to, the unknown depths of space where nightmares dwell. In the final months before her disappearance, Amelia had been restless. There were whispers, coded messages that came at odd hours, hushed communications that always seemed to end abruptly when I entered the room. Then there were the unannounced trips to a remote facility in the Nevada desert, a place known to only a handful of people, shrouded in secrecy and whispered to be the real Area 51. I accompanied her on 3 such trips, each time under the cover of night, each time without any explanation beyond the cryptic command, "We're going to the edge." What I witnessed there, I cannot forget. The first time, it seemed like nothing more than a routine inspection, the kind she would make to any research facility. But the longer I observed, the clearer it became that there was something else going on. Amelia would meet with individuals I didn't recognize, men and women who spoke in low, urgent tones and seemed to regard her with a mix of awe and fear. There were briefcases full of documents, scientific diagrams that looked like nothing I'd ever seen before, images of strange cosmic phenomena, and symbols that did not resemble any known language. And there were always questions. Questions Amelia seemed to ask with more determination than I'd ever heard in her voice before. On the last visit, just a week before her disappearance, I saw it. Hovering above the facility was a craft, unlike any spacecraft humanity had ever engineered. It was spherical, emitting a pulsating blue light that made the very air around us hum with energy. It moved in a way that defied all known laws of physics. Amelia's face, normally a mask of calculated composure, was lit with something I had never seen before. Fear mixed with an almost desperate excitement. After that night, everything changed. I was approached by one of her mysterious contacts, a man who introduced himself only as Mr. Gray. He was tall, with eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. He pulled me aside and spoke in a low voice that sent a chill down my spine. "Some things are better left unseen, Mr. Reeves," he warned. "Better left unknown." But it was too late. I had seen too much. I began to notice small things at first. My phone would click and hiss during calls. Strange vehicles parked outside my home for hours. I told myself it was paranoia, that my imagination was running wild. But then Amelia disappeared, and everything fell apart. The day she vanished, I was summoned to the headquarters of the space agency. There was an odd stillness in the air, a kind of tension that I had never felt before. I was led to her private office by a young, nervous assistant. The room was empty, the blinds drawn, the air thick with the scent of ozone, and something else, something metallic. On her desk, I saw a single encrypted tablet, its screen glowing faintly with the emblem of a project I had never heard of, Project Horizon. My heart pounded as I accessed it. Inside were files I wasn't supposed to see, classified reports, transcripts, photos. They spoke of an encounter with an unknown entity, an exchange of something, though the details were maddeningly vague. And all paths led back to that remote desert facility. I closed the files and felt a chill run down my spine. I knew then that her disappearance was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of something far worse. I glanced around the room, suddenly feeling exposed, watched. And that's when I noticed a small red light blinking on the corner of a bookshelf, a surveillance camera. They were watching me. I had only minutes, maybe seconds, before they would come for me too. And so I ran. I took the tablet, tucked it into my bag, and walked out of the building as calmly as I could, fighting the urge to break into a sprint. I had to get somewhere safe, somewhere I could think. I needed to understand what I had just uncovered. I needed to find out what Amelia had known. And most of all, I needed to stay alive long enough to tell someone, anyone, what I'd found. I don't have much time. They're closing in. But you need to know this. You need to understand that the history we've been told is only half the truth. The real story is something far stranger, far darker, and it's been hiding in plain sight all along. It began years ago, in my early days working with Amelia, when I first sensed that something was off. I'd only been on her team for a few months when I noticed a peculiar pattern. It wasn't like anything I had learned during my training, which had focused on protocols, mission planning, and crisis management. But none of that prepared me for the strange obsession that had quietly consumed her. At first, it was subtle. I'd be in the lab, standing just far enough away to give her space, but close enough to assist if needed. Her usual reading consisted of technical manuals, astrophysics journals, and mission briefings. But gradually, I began to see something different. Thick, dog-eared volumes on unexplained cosmic phenomena, mysterious signals from deep space, and even documents on theoretical dimensions. And then there were the late-night sessions. I was called to her private observatory one evening, told only to prepare for a special assignment. Amelia was already seated at the control panel, the dim light of the screens casting long shadows over her face. Her expression was intense, far more focused than I had ever seen. Beside her stood a figure I didn't recognize, a woman with sharp features and eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. "Michael," Amelia said, nodding to me, "you'll accompany me on an excursion tomorrow evening. You will speak of this to no one. Do you understand?" I nodded, unsure of what to expect. The next day, we traveled by private jet under the cover of darkness. Amelia unusually quiet, her eyes scanning the horizon with a strange anticipation. We flew for hours until we reached the remote facility in the desert. I knew the place by reputation, a research center shrouded in secrecy and speculation. It was said that during the Cold War, strange things happened there, but I never imagined Amelia would be connected to it. When we arrived, the wind whipped across the barren landscape, carrying the scent of sand and something else, ozone perhaps. A cluster of high-tech buildings loomed in the distance, their windows dark. As we approached, a group of people appeared, each one more peculiar than the last. There were scientists in lab coats, intelligence officers whose eyes darted about as if expecting something to leap out of the shadows, and a man who looked every bit the part of a seasoned astronaut, weathered distant, his gaze fixed on the sky as if he were searching for something lost. I followed as Amelia was led to an underground facility, its doors thick and reinforced. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Holographic displays of star systems and strange anomalies floated in the air. They spoke in hushed tones, their words barely more than a whisper, but I caught snippets, anomalous signals, dimensional breaches, extraterrestrial contact. They spoke of an encounter, a meeting between representatives of humanity and something else. One scientist, with wild gray hair and eyes that seemed to burn with a frantic energy, looked at Amelia with a kind of awe. "Dr. Winters," he said, "we're closer than ever. They know we're listening." Amelia nodded, her face set with determination. "We must be prepared for their arrival," she replied, her voice firm. I was bewildered. Prepared for whose arrival? And why was Amelia, of all people, leading this conversation? My training had taught me to keep my mouth shut, to observe, not to question. But this was unlike anything I'd ever imagined. The more I listened, the more I realized that whatever was happening here was far from ordinary. The meetings continued over the following days, each more secretive than the last. I accompanied Amelia to the facility multiple times, each visit deepening the mystery. The people she met with were always the same, a tight-knit group, each with a distinct role. There was Dr. Morrison, a physicist who had once worked at CERN and spoke of energy signatures not of this earth. Then there was Colonel Harris, a former Air Force pilot who had seen things during test flights he couldn't explain. And there was Lennox, the astronaut who had supposedly witnessed an object maneuvering at impossible speeds while orbiting the Earth. Each time, the discussions grew more urgent, the tension more palpable. I overheard talk of a meeting that had supposedly taken place years ago, not between nations, but between species, a gathering at this very facility where certain agreements were made, agreements that involved not just the transfer of knowledge, but something more, something about the future of humanity itself. Then one night, it happened. We were there late, much later than usual. The cold was biting, the kind that creeps into your bones and refuses to leave. The wind howled outside, rattling the reinforced windows. I stood at my post as always, my eyes darting between Amelia and the others, whose conversation seemed particularly strained that night. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air. It was so deep I felt it in my chest before I heard it with my ears. The room fell silent. Even the scientists, usually absorbed in their instruments, looked up with wide eyes. I turned and saw it, a rift opening in the air itself, a tear in the fabric of reality. Through it, shapes began to emerge, entities that defied description, beings of light and shadow. My heart pounded in my chest. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The room was bathed in an otherworldly glow. Amelia stood at the forefront, her eyes fixed on the phenomenon. "It's them," she whispered, almost to herself. Then Mr. Gray appeared at my side, his expression grim. "You're seeing too much, Mr. Reeves," he said in a low tone. "Remember your duty. Remember what happens to those who don't." His eyes bore into mine, a warning I knew I had to heed, but it was too late. I had seen, and I knew in that moment there was no going back. The rift closed as abruptly as it had opened, leaving the room in darkness save for the blinking lights of the equipment. Amelia turned to me, her expression unreadable. "We're done for tonight," she said softly, but there was an edge to her voice, a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Fear, maybe, or perhaps resignation. As we left the facility, questions swirled in my mind. What had I just witnessed? What were they doing here? And how was Amelia involved in all of this? One thing was clear. I had stepped into a world that was never meant for me, a world where reality was far stranger than any fiction, and there was no way to unsee what I had seen. After Amelia disappeared, a strange emptiness filled the agency. It wasn't just concern. It was something deeper, a sense of unease that seemed to grip everyone. I was summoned to a high-level meeting, ostensibly to assist with the search efforts. But there was something else, something unspoken that weighed heavily in the air. It was then, amidst the chaos of her disappearance, that I found myself drawn back to her private observatory, a place I had rarely entered without her. The door was slightly ajar, the light inside dim. I stepped in, feeling a strange pull, almost as if I was being guided by an unseen force. Her desk was cluttered, holographic displays still active, equations and notes floating in midair. I knew I had no business being there, but something made me stay. Then I saw it, a small, almost imperceptible indentation on the side panel of her desk. I pressed it, and with a soft click, a hidden compartment opened, revealing a data crystal. My heart began to race. What was so important that it needed to be hidden like this, even from those closest to her? I hesitated for a moment, then inserted the crystal into the terminal. Files began to download, encrypted, classified, and bearing the highest security clearance. The first file was labeled Project Horizon. I opened it, and my breath caught in my throat. The documents inside were filled with technical jargon, classified correspondences, and images. The first page was a letter from a government agency, dated years ago, addressing an incident that involved an encounter with an extraterrestrial intelligence. It was marked Eyes Only, and Amelia's name was listed among the few who had clearance to view it. I continued reading, my hands trembling slightly. The documents outlined a covert operation, Project Horizon. It detailed not just contact with an alien intelligence, but something far more sinister. A negotiation, an exchange of not just information, but people. There were references to experiments, to gateways opening to other dimensions, and protocols for future contact. I could hardly believe what I was reading. Amelia had been deeply involved, not just informed, but a guiding force, a key player in whatever this was. There were transcripts of meetings with her notes scribbled in the margins, equations and theories that went beyond anything known to modern science. I reached the last file, where a single line stood out, handwritten in code. After decrypting it, the message sent a chill through me. Prepare for assimilation. It's the only way. I stared at the words, my mind racing. Assimilation? What did that mean? And why had Amelia felt the need to keep these documents hidden, even from the agency? Suddenly, I heard footsteps approaching the observatory. I quickly ejected the data crystal, closed the compartment, and stepped away from the desk just as the door opened. It was Mr. Gray. His eyes narrowed as he saw me standing there. "Mr. Reeves," he said slowly, his voice cold. "What are you doing here?" I forced a smile, hoping he couldn't hear the thundering of my heart. "Just looking for clues, anything that might help us find Dr. Winters," I replied. He stared at me for a moment longer, then nodded, but his gaze lingered on me, as if weighing my every word. "Be careful, Michael," he finally said. "There are things you're better off not knowing." He left, but I knew then that I was already in too deep. I had seen the forbidden files, and with them, a side of Amelia, a reality itself, that had been carefully hidden from the world. I had to find out more, to understand what Project Horizon really was, and why it had been kept secret for so long. But I knew that every step I took from here on out would be watched, every move monitored. And I also knew that whoever they were not done with us yet. I knew I'd gone too far the moment I left the agency with that data crystal. For days, I felt the eyes on me everywhere I went. There was no mistaking it. I wasn't just being watched, I was being hunted. The first sign was small, innocuous enough that I might have dismissed it if I hadn't already been on edge. A drone that seemed to appear wherever I went, hovering silently at a distance. Then my personal devices began to act up, files disappearing, encrypted messages I hadn't sent showing up in my outbox. It all came to a head on a stormy night, driving back from a contact I had met in a deserted diner off the grid. The rain hammered down, turning the road into a slick, gleaming ribbon. I was only a few miles from the safe house when it happened. Out of nowhere, a blinding light enveloped my car, and the electronics went haywire. The engine died, the controls locked up, and I felt the car lift off the ground. Panic surged through me as I struggled to comprehend what was happening. Then, just as suddenly, the light vanished, and the car dropped back onto the road with a jarring thud. I sat there, shaken, the rain pounding on the roof. Whatever had just happened, it was a warning, a demonstration of power beyond anything I knew. They were letting me know they could reach me anytime, anywhere. I made my way back on foot, sticking to the shadows, my mind racing. The next day, I found a message on my secure terminal, typed in plain text with no traceable source. "You are meddling in affairs beyond your comprehension. Cease your inquiries." I wasn't surprised, but it sent a chill down my spine nonetheless. Whoever was behind this had eyes everywhere, even in the deepest corners of the dark web. It was only a matter of time before they made another move. A week passed in a tense blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The anonymous threats continued. Strangers brushing past me on the street, whispering, "Leave it be," before melting into the crowd. Emails that disappeared from my devices seconds after I opened them. I tried to reach out to old contacts, but they were evasive, scared. I was alone. Until I met him. It happened at a secluded park I frequented, a place where I went to clear my head. I was sitting on a bench when a man approached me. He looked worn, his face lined with the kind of weariness that comes from knowing too much. His eyes, though, were sharp, scanning the surroundings before settling on me. "Michael Reeves," he said, his voice low. "I know what you're looking for, and I know why they want you silenced." I didn't ask who he was. The way he carried himself, the way he knew my name, told me all I needed to know. "Who are you?" I asked, my tone cautious. "Call me Orion," he replied, flashing a hint of a smile. "I used to be part of Project Horizon until I got too close to something they didn't want me to know." I leaned in, intrigued but wary. "You're talking about the assimilation, aren't you?" His smile faded, replaced by a grim expression. "Yes, and you've only scratched the surface." He glanced around again, then leaned closer. Project Horizon wasn't just about contact. It was about integration, a merging of species. The beings we encountered aren't interested in diplomacy. They see humanity as raw material, something to be absorbed. I listened, trying to piece together the fragments of what I already knew. "What happened to Amelia?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Orion's eyes darkened. She volunteered. She believed that by joining them, she could guide the process, protect humanity from within. But it's a one-way journey. Once you cross over, there's no coming back. I felt a chill run through me. "So, they're preparing for mass assimilation?" He nodded. "Yes, and the agency is complicit. They see it as evolution, the next step for humanity." I leaned back, trying to process it all. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Orion said, "I've seen too many good people disappear for asking the wrong questions. And because I'm tired of running." He stood up, his hand on my shoulder. "Be careful, Michael. They'll come for you sooner or later. Trust no one." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with 1,000 questions and the dawning realization that I had become part of something far larger, far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The stakes were higher than I thought, and now I knew that it was not just about Amelia, not just about the agency, but something that could alter the course of human existence. And I had just made myself the next target. I knew I had to go back to the facility. It was the only place where I might find the answers I needed. The missing piece of the puzzle that had consumed my life since Amelia's disappearance. I infiltrated the grounds under the cover of darkness, bypassing security systems with codes I had acquired through less than legal means. Inside one of the underground labs, I found her Amelia, or at least what remained of her. She was suspended in a chamber filled with a luminescent fluid, her body altered in ways that defied understanding. Her eyes opened, and for a moment, they met mine. There was recognition there, and something else, warning. "Michael." Her voice echoed in my mind, though her lips did not move. "You shouldn't have come." Before I could react, alarms blared. The room was flooded with light, and figures emerged from the shadows, agents, scientists, and others. Beings that shifted between forms, their outlines shimmering. Mr. Gray stepped forward. "It's over, Mr. Reeves," he said calmly. "You can't stop what's coming." I stood my ground. "What have you done to her?" He smiled faintly. "We have unlocked her potential. Soon, all of humanity will join her." I reached into my pocket, fingers closing around a small device Orion had given me, A disruptor, he had called it. I activated it, and a pulse of energy rippled through the room. The lights flickered, and the beings recoiled. "Now!" I shouted, hoping against hope that it would work. The containment chamber holding Amelia began to crack. With a surge of strength, she broke free, the fluid cascading to the floor. "Michael, we have to destroy the gateway," she said, her voice stronger now, more human. Together, we fought our way through the facility, alarms blaring, opposition closing in from all sides. We reached the central chamber, the nexus where the dimensional rifts were being generated. Amelia interfaced with the control systems, her altered physiology allowing her to override the safeguards. "This will shut it down," she said, "but it will also—" "I know," I replied. "Do it." She initiated the sequence, and the facility began to shake. Energy arcs danced across the machinery as the gateway destabilized. "Go," she urged. "You have to get out of here." "I'm not leaving you," I protested. She smiled sadly. "You already have." The realization hit me. This was a one-way trip for her. She was the key to closing the gateway, but it would cost her everything. I turned and ran, the corridors collapsing around me. I barely made it out before the entire facility was consumed in a blinding light. In the aftermath, there was nothing left but a crater where the facility had been. The agency covered it up, of course, a seismic event, they called it. But I knew the truth. I went into hiding, carrying the knowledge of what had happened, of what almost came to pass. They are still out there, the beings from beyond and those who would aid them. But as long as I draw breath, I will continue to fight to expose the truth. The truth is that we've been lied to, manipulated, controlled. The truth is that there are things out there, things they don't want us to know, things that would change everything we think we know about our world, our history, our future. The truth is out there, hidden in plain sight, and it's up to us to find it. But the question is, will we?